Hi everyone, welcome back to our Little Law YouTube channel. So today we are going to deep dive into something that can make or break your web application's success through collecting the requirement for UI front-end performance testing. Now I know what you're thinking. Requirements, yes, that sounds boring, but trust me, this is where most of the performance testing projects fail before they even start. So by the end of this video, you'll have a complete roadmap to gather all the requirements you need to run successful performance tests. So let's jump in and let's see how does it work. So the first section, which you see here, the business context and objectives. So first things first, we need to understand the why behind our performance testing. And this is not just about making the websites faster, but it's about making the business more successful. And then the second part, which is the business goals deep dive. So when you sit down with your business stakeholders, so here's what you need to ask, which is like what's keeping you awake at night? Maybe it's users abandoning their shopping carts, or maybe it's the competitors' website loading faster, or maybe the customer support is flooded with compliance about slow pages. So to tell you a real scenario, I remember when I was working with an e-commerce client where a 2-second delay in their checkout page was costing them $50,000 per month in loss of sales. And that's the kind of business impact we are talking about. So let me give you a quick tip here. So always frame the performance in business terms. Don't say we need to improve the time to interactive. Instead, say words like we can potentially increase the conversions by 15% by making the page interactive faster. And then the understanding of users. Uh, this is where it gets really interesting because you need to know who you are optimizing your application for. Are your users mostly on mobile in developing countries with slower networks? Or are they busy executives checking your app between meetings? Or are they students on campus Wi-Fi? So you have to segment the users. You have to find who your users are. And to give you a quick example on this, when I was working on a banking application where we have discovered that 70% of users were accessing it during their lunch break on mobile, and this completely changed our testing strategy because we had to focus on quick mobile optimized interactions rather than desktop browsing sessions. So the action item here for you is you have to look at your Google Analytics right now, check the technology reports. You'll be surprised to see what devices and browsers your users actually use versus what you think they use. And then the section two, the technical environment and infrastructure. So now we're getting into the technical nitty gritty, but don't worry, I'll make things easy to understand. That's the rule, that's the policy of Little's Law. So the current application architecture. So think of your application architecture like a house. And before you can make it more energy efficient, you need to know if it's a modern smart home or a 100-year-old Victorian mansion. And each requires different approaches. So if you're dealing with a single page application just built in React, your performance challenges are completely different from a traditional multi-page WordPress site. And SPAs typically have slower initial loads, but just remember there were like faster subsequent navigation, while MPAs have, when I say MPAs, the multi-page applications, they have faster initial loads but full page refreshes. I mean, they need to have the full page refreshes. So to give you an example at this point of time, I'll give you an interesting one. So when I was giving a consultation for a company who are migrating from a jQuery to React, their initial page load time actually got worse. But you know what? The user engagement went through the roof because the page transitions became instant. So what we did is we had to redefine what the performance meant for their business. And then the infrastructure check, the infrastructure reality check, I will say, because here is where a lot of team gets tripped up, and you might have the most optimized front end code in the world. But remember, if your CDN is misconfigured or your servers are overloaded, none of them matters. And I always ask the teams like, where are your servers located and where are your users placed? And if your servers are in Virginia but most users are in Southeast Asia, you are fighting an uphill battle against physics, and physics always wins. So just remember that. And just to give you a quick tip here, Use tools like web page test to test from different global locations, because you might discover that your app loads in 2 seconds from New York but might take 8 seconds from Bangalore or Mumbai or from Chennai. And again, we're going to see how the web page test works, but this is again a very common approach, a very common requirement document for any front end UI, front end performance testing. And then the performance requirements and targets. And now talking about the third section, that is the performance requirements and targets. So this is where the rubber meets the road. Yes, you are going to actually set what the actual performance target is. And here's the thing. If you don't have specific targets, how do you know if you have succeeded, right? So you need to have your targets. You need to know what are you really doing it, right? So talking about the core web vitals, so Google gave us a gift with the core web vitals. Yes, the three metrics that actually correlate with user experience. And let me break this down into plain English for easy understanding. The first thing is the largest contentful paint. So this measures when the main content of your page loads. And think of it as where or when or where do you use, where does my user see something meaningful? So the magic number is 2.5 seconds. Why? In fact, I've discussed it, but let me just reiterate, because Google analyzed billions of page loads and found that's when the user starts getting impatient, and you know the reason now. And then the first input delay. This is about responsiveness. So when a user clicks or taps something, how long do they wait for a response? Under 100 milliseconds, and that feels instant to human. So over 300 milliseconds feels sluggish. Yes. And then the cumulative layout shift. So ever been reading an article and suddenly the text jumps because an ad loaded? Yes, that's a layout shift, and it drives the user crazy. So a score under zero point 0.1 means your page is stable. And then the setting of realistic targets. So here's a mistake I see all the time. Teams set targets based on what they want rather than what's achievable with their constraints. So if you're a content heavy news site, you're not going to load as fast as a simple landing page, and that's okay. And then the framework for setting targets. So check your current performance baseline. Look at your top three competitors and consider your technical constraints, and then set targets that are challenging but achievable. So in fact, I have worked previously with a media company where their current LCP was 6 seconds. So we set a target of like 2.5 seconds, which would have required rebuilding the entire site. But instead, we set an interim target of 4 seconds, and then we achieved it. And then we set a stretch goal of 3 seconds. And now coming back to the next point where we were moving beyond the core web vitals. So don't forget about the metrics that matter for your specific use case. But here there are other few metrics, that is the time to interactive, the speed index, the total blocking time. So let me give you a quick intro on that. So time to interactive are very critical for dashboards and complex applications. The speed index are very important for content heavy sites. So if you are someone who is testing content heavy sites, then speed index is a critical metric for you. And then the total blocking time, which is essential for interactive experiences. So the tip here is for you: create a performance budget spreadsheet, set limits for JavaScript bundle size, image sizes, even third-party scripts, because you have to treat these like financial budgets. When you're over budget, you have something to go. And then the next part, which is where we're going to discuss about the devices and the browser coverage. So this section is all about testing in the real world, not the perfect world, but but still it's a real world of a development machine. So the device reality check, that's what you have to start with. So most of the users are not using the latest iPhone or a MacBook Pro, but they're using some mid-range Android phones that are 2 to 3 years old with 4 GB of RAM and a slower processors. I call this the developer bubble program, because developers test on high-end devices with fast internet, then wonder why the users complain about performance. And it is like testing a car's fuel efficiency by only driving downhill. That doesn't give you the real feel, or that doesn't give you the real performance, right? So that's the reason I have this 3 device rule. So the first thing is high-end device. Use your latest iPhone or flagship Android. This is your performance ceiling, where you get your performance ceiling. And then use a mid-range device, something like an iPhone 12 or Samsung Galaxy A series. This represents most of your users. And then the low-end devices, an older phone with limited RAM. This is your performance floor. So you have your ceiling, you have your representation, and then you have your flooring. So this is the 3 device rule. And then the network conditions that matters. Wi-Fi speed in your office is not representative of your user's experience. It always tests on 3G. which are still common in many parts of the world, and then the slow 4G, where the user experiences in crowded areas are with weak signal, and then we have the unstable connections where you have to simulate users on trains and elevators or moving between cell towers. So let me give you a quick understanding, a quick story on my experience. So once, when I was working with a client, I discovered that a client's checkout process completely broke on 3G network. We all know, right? We had it. We worked on that. We used it a long time back. I think few years back. And the reason it broke is because it relied on a real-time validation that timed out on slow networks. And yeah, this was costing them thousands in abandoned cards. So just imagine how much of loss they would have incurred. And yeah, in fact, we have even submitted the amount of percentage of loss they have submitted. Again, that's the reason they have come up with more testing processes, and then we have made a lot of tuning suggestions to it. And then the browser compatibility strategy. Don't try to support every browser perfectly. Focus on where your users actually are. And for that, you have to use analytics to drive decisions. But remember, Chrome dominates desktop and Android. Safari is critical for iOS users. Edge is growing. It's grown actually, and it is especially in enterprises. Firefox has passionate users who will notice if you ignore them. So here, the 95% rule: aim to support browsers that cover 95% of your user base, and that last 5% often requires 50% of the effort. And next comes the critical user journeys and scenarios, and this is where the performance testing gets interesting and strategic. Yes, not all pages are created equal. Some are mission critical and others are nice to have, so you have to identify your money pages. Yes, every application has pages that directly impact the business success. For an e-commerce site, it might be product pages and checkout. For a SaaS app, it might be the dashboard and onboarding flow. For a media site, it might be article page and the home page. And here, I will tell about this $100 test. So if you could only optimize 3 pages with a $100 budget, which ones would drive the most business value? And those are your critical user journeys. Yep. And then talking about the user journeys uh, in terms of mapping it with performance. So let's walk through a real example. So this is starting with the product page load. So user needs to see the product details quickly, and they have to add to cart interaction, so it should be instant and provide immediate feedback. And then talking about the cart page, you need to it needs to be loaded fast because users are committed to buying. And then the checkout form, where it must be responsive during data entry. And then when it comes to the payment processing, users need clear feedback that their payment is being processed. And finally, the confirmation page, which are the final steps that need to load to complete the transaction. So each step has different performance requirement, and the add to cart button needs to respond in less than 100 milliseconds. But the confirmation page can take a bit longer because the user is already committed, so he already paid, right? So you can wait for the confirmation page, but not for the add to cart button, right? And then the scenario based testing. So when it comes to scenario based testing, don't just test the happy path. That's how I started. So the first time visitor, where there are no cached resources, it's kind of a cold start. And then for those who are like returning users, there could be some cached resources. It's kind of a warm start. And then during the peak traffic periods when your servers are under load, and then the promotional events when traffic spikes and user behavior changes. So the point here is you have to test all these paths, not just the first time or only the returning visitor or only the peak traffic or only the promotional events. So just to give you an example here, there was a client's website performed very well during normal traffic, but completely collapsed during a promotional event. And even we discovered their image, CDN could not handle the spike in the product page views. And starting from section 6 to 10, they're going to be like more informative and interesting. So what I'll do is I'll cover these topics like from section 6 to the end. I'll cover it in a separate video because today I think it's too much of knowledge sharing, I believe. So I'll create the video for you tomorrow, the rest of the video, which will be more interesting. So if you're someone who is new to our UI performance testing, please don't forget to subscribe to Little Star YouTube channel and like the video if you find it very interesting and informative. And thank you so much, and see you all in our next video. Until then, it's bye bye from Vasan Shanmugam and your favorite Little Star YouTube channel. Take care and bye bye.